Elizabeth Scroggin, as she told you, and my job is to travel around the country and help you understand why people are so weird. Right? Sound good? Have you ever been in a staff meeting with the people that you work with and thought, oh my God, what's wrong with you? Have you had this moment at this point in time? So I'm a communications professor at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, and I've been studying millennials and Gen Zs for the past, 15 years at this point. And I had this really great plan. My plan was that I was just going to make all my students love me. And if they loved me, they were going to work super hard. Has anybody tried this whole buddy-buddy thing? It doesn't work, does it? There is no bottom to that empty pit. So I kind of learned what I needed to do was figure out how to maximize potential of my millennial students. So here's the thing, most millennials are coming in right now. I've found that in most cases, millennials come into this presentation mad, and most of the time boomers leave mad, right? Nobody talks about them to their face ever, so don't worry, this is equal opportunity insulting. Everybody good with that? Say yes.
Yes.
Great, you're in a comms class now, and we will interact with one another along the way. And then I'll give you a little bit of time for questions along the way as well. Okay. So things you have to know before we get too deep in. First thing is that generational dates are always going to vary. So if you decide to geek out about this later on, you're going to see different dates no matter where you go, okay? In particular, you guys, when you work with big data, it's easier to do things in whole numbers. So this is why Pew Research, Census Bureau, groups like that do things on the tens. Those are not really actually clear indicators of divisions of generations whatsoever. So like if you're born in 1980 and another person's born in 1984, they have totally different perspectives on the world, because those people in 1984, they were raised with like America's Most Wanted started coming on in prime time, right? And all of a sudden all the parents were convinced that their babies weren't going to get snatched. But before that, our parents didn't give a crap about that. Right? There was no Amber Alert for us. Our parents were like, cool, I'll make another one. Right? It doesn't exist for us in the same way. And so it shapes our viewpoint really, really differently. So if you really want to geek out about it later on, go to Strauss and Howe. They're historians. And basically what they say is we're on a loop. And anybody who's been on this planet for any extended time will tell you that's true. Patterns repeat themselves over and over again. Trends are on a pendulum. We're basically constantly reacting to our parents' bad parenting over and over and over again to shift trends. So what I did is I took Strauss and Howe's numbers. I have kids that always need extra credit, so I just started studying the heck out of them. And then I sent it to my friends in California, and then I sent it to my friends in Colorado. And the good news is that people are weird everywhere. It's not just a Little Rock thing. All right? Everybody got that? Say yes.
Yes.
Right, okay. The next thing I want you to know, sorry, I hear your little American heart breaking right now at this idea that you're not that special, because we are born in an individualistic society. And in order to be in an individualistic society and think me first, you have to be told that you're a shiny diamond and there's nobody just like you, and that's absolute bullcrap, isn't it? 100% not true. You've all worked with at least one person over your career and you cannot remember that joker's name, can you? And they're like, my name is Brent, and you're like, you Brian to me. Brian, walk like Brian, walk like Brian. New person comes in the office, you hate her immediately, right? Why is it? It's because she reminds you of the mean girl from high school. So you can be categorized. Example, have you ever done a personality test before? Raise your hand if you've done one before. Okay, now, chances are, let's assume you told the truth on that thing. Let's start there. When those results came back, chances are you looked at them and you were like, oh my gosh, this is so accurate. Like, this is stuff I've never told anyone ever. Do you know why we can do that, Pumpkin? It's because you're not that special. If I can take the most complicated part of you, which is your personality, and turn it into an ENFP with Myers-Briggs, or a DISC, or a red or a blue, or a yellow or a green, or Gryffindor, a Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, you're not that special. We can categorize you. So the same thing happens here when it comes to generations. What we're looking at are two things. The first thing is that parenting trends happen in decade trends. So you think about the helicopter parent, or the Pinterest parent, right? Or for people who were boomers, their parents were traditionalists and they were all told that children were to be seen and not heard. There's parenting trends that we have to pay attention to along the way. Do you know what we call the parents of today's youngest children? Lawnmower parents, right? Basically the idea is they just mow anything out of the way that could potentially be a problem for the child. And now the kid's like 15 and they're like, oh my God, a pine cone, right? Like they don't know how to function with base level things because every potential stumbling block has been removed. So that's what you're parenting soon. Be excited. You're not that special. You can be categorized. The first level is parenting styles. The other thing we're doing is looking at your childhood, your formative years. You take those patterns with you for the rest of your life. So this is how you can be an 80s baby or a 90s kid. We're looking at things like movies, music, what was happening in the economy, were we at war, parenting trends. We're looking at sort of collectives along the way. So when you combine those two, that's what gives us the most rounded viewpoint of generations. So it is possible, however, that you are an outlier. Okay, I know that you guys run tests all day, every day, and you get consistent numbers. So what happens when you get an outlying statistic? What do you do with it? You throw it out, right? So if you are that darn special, and I'm not talking about you anyway, you're probably not, no matter what your mama told you, okay? But the fact is that you could be an outlier. And you probably are simply because you're in the military. That's going to be one of the things that's going to make you an outlier. But when we talk about generations, we primarily call these people old souls. Right? Anybody know anybody's an old soul? They're 27 and they really like knitting and brandy, and you're like, what? You're an alien, right? So what we've actually seen is that the more adultish things you have to do when you're a child, the more you mentally begin aging up. So there's all these kind of things, and they start to stack on top of one another. So if you only have like one or two of these things we're going to talk about, you might not necessarily age up mentally very far. But if you have 7 of those things, that's why you feel like a 60-year-old even though you're 40, okay? So examples of some of the things. The first is that if you were raised in the United States from ages 1 to 15. Now, I live in Huntsville. Tons of military kids who are in our town, right? So if you spent 3 years in Korea of your childhood or 3 years in Germany, there's a cultural overlay that's going to make you different. You now have become an orange. And so we can't compare apples and oranges in the same way. Everybody got that? And most of our research is obviously going to be people who were raised in the United States during those formative years in order to make sure we have a consistent group of people to work through. The next one is people who are raised by a single parent. Anybody here raised by a single parent? All right, people raised by a single parent. You went off for the very first time, had your first roommate, and they couldn't do their laundry, and you were like, how is this possible? I could fry an egg at 5. Right, you with me on this? So raised by a single parent, usually you have to step up, do adult things earlier in your life, right? So that's another one of the big things that we see happen really frequently. Another thing would be people who are what we call oops babies. Anybody here an oops baby? Your parents were you're getting older and older, man. Right? Your parents were totally done having kids, and then oops, 10 years later you came along. And whenever you went to your friend's house, there would be a totally different set of rules. So you have these sort of age normative things, and then you have things that happen when you've got parenting across multiple decades. So that's another one. The next one is that if you have a parent with an addiction, this is a hard one to think about, but if you have a parent that was battling addiction, at the very least, you had to handle yourself socially in a way that other children don't have to have. You had to make decisions about whether it was okay to have a friend over to spend the night, or when to talk about your grades. You had to make these different ideas, and that's a very adult concept. If your parents were raised outside of the United States, this is another big one. So I'll give you a great example. One of my friends is from Jamaica, and he tells us, well, he's from Alabama where I am, but his parents were both raised in Jamaica. And he tells this great story about the first time he had a play date, which is proof that he was a millennial, right? Because the rest of us just played not normal people. All right. So he said the first day he had a friend over for a play date, and they got to the cookie jar, right? Being wild people. And mom takes off shoe, throws it at them. The kid who's American is freaking out. They're like, oh, we've got to call the Department of Human Resources. You are being abused. And he said, I looked at him and said, my mom's Jamaican. This is the nicest thing she's done to me today. So there's parenting trends, right, that go along with different cultures that you also have to pay attention to. Another one would be people from a large family. Anybody with a large family, 4 or more kids? All right, especially if you're the oldest of 4 or more kids, you're basically substitute parent, right? So your parents look at you and they're like, we're going out, don't open the door, right? That's how it goes. But it's interesting, when you are the baby of large families, you have more likely to fit most of the stereotypes of a generation. Now, why is this? If mentally you age up by doing adult things, what do we do to the babies' families? We keep them small, right? It's the oldest kid, the parents and the kids kind of resolve together. So if you were the youngest, you would ask for a sandwich, and your parents would be like, oh, Schmooksy Poo, what kind of little PBJ do you want? And then the 7-year-old right above you would be like, I want a sandwich too, and they'd be like, fix it yourself, right? It's really totally different in those age groups. If you've been through the military, do as you, they wipe your hard drive, and they reset you to a military mindset, which is very traditionalist in nature. We'll talk about that and help you understand. But this is why it's so weird working on a base when you're military and you're working with civilians that haven't gone through that training. Because you as military are used to people telling you to do weird things and you just do them. Right? They're like, I want the rocks moved from one side to the other. And you're like, yes, sir, I will move the rocks. And the civilians are like, why? Why? We don't need the rocks moved. That's dumb. Why would we do that? Right? So there's sort of a difference in that. And then also military family. So if you're a military family and a parent went on deployment, you had to step up and do things in a very different way. It shapes your viewpoint in a different way. The last two are my favorite. The first one is your grandparent involvement. Anybody like get off the bus to grandma and grandpa's house? They were super involved. No? Nothing there? All right. Okay, so here's what's interesting. Your grandparents can not only make your life miserable, they can also make your parents' life miserable, okay? So if they're around a lot, they're able to kind of put the trends, and I don't know about you, but I was way more afraid of my grandma's switch than I ever was of my mother's. So they're able to put a lot of those trends and norms in. So when I run into what I call a rock star millennial, and really all you have to do to be a rock star for me is understand there's a game being played at work, and that you don't get to determine the rules of those games. So when I run into a young person who can shake hands and kiss babies, right, who understands to bring a yellow steno pad with them everywhere that they go, because older people love a yellow steno pad, right? When they understand the sort of rules of the game, they can make small talk. Then almost, I would say 9 times out of 10, it's a grandparent who's taught them that sort of information along the way, okay? And then the last one is people from a small town. Okay, small town people, let me see you. All right, small town people, you don't have one mama, do you? You have 31 mamas who had full permission to whoop your bottom at any given time. You had all these other people who were involved in the raising of you, right? So this is an important kind of concept for you to see, because what we've been doing as a culture, at least for the past 20 to 30 years, if we've been slowly removing these people we call refiners. We've been taking these other adults who have this sort of implicit permission from your parents to knock the edges off your personality. We've been taking them out of the world. So if you're a small town person, you had that get off my lawn guy, right? You knew exactly who he was. You had the coach that would stand on the sideline in 7th grade and just cuss you. And your mom did not write a letter to the editor, did she? No, she stood on the sideline and cussed you because you weren't hustling. Right? You had the woman that told you you were going to hell because you created the sanctuary. There were all these people who were involved in the story. Some of you were raised in a time when your teacher could literally hit you with a block of wood. Okay? That's very different than today's society. So what you have to understand is, in removing these refiners, you are now having people who are coming into your workplace who are in a less refined social state than what many people were before. So let's kind of use this example of a diamond. You got 2 diamonds here. Are they both valuable? Yes. Does anybody want it in the condition on the left? No. You want it in the condition on the right. Well, to get it to the condition on the right, you have to have pain. You have to have chipping away of imperfections. You have to have people who are experts in clarity versus cut versus right. You have to have lots of people involved getting it from here to here. So as we've been removing those natural refiners, you now find yourself looking at people who are 23, 24 and saying things that you think are base human stuff. Like, you can't be late. And they're like, it was only 10 minutes. And you're like, that's still late. Your head spins around twice, right? Or you look at them and you say, maybe don't say every single thing that pops into your head. Some things are inside thoughts. Keep them there. Right? You find yourself saying some things that you don't think that you should have to say because you got those lessons earlier on in your life. You got them from the refiners, you got it from the teacher, you got it from your first job. Y'all, it is possible that people are coming out of college right now at 24, 25, 26 who have never had a first job at all. You're their first job ever, right? So they didn't have the privilege of learning that if you were late and you worked at the Winn-Dixie, you had to scrub the toilets, right? They didn't learn a lot of those valuable lessons. So it's important for you to know that, because the problem is we have a tendency to look at everybody around us and think they're doing things just to be jerks, when actually they're looking through the lens that they have. So let me stop. When we talk about perception, right, your perspective on the world, the best way for me to help you understand this is prescription glasses. So have you ever gone to get your eyes checked? I know you have, because legally you have to, because your body belongs to the American government, okay? So when you go and you get your eyes checked, you know how the doctor's like, better like this, better like this. And it's so micro, teeny tiny shifts that sometimes you're like, I don't know what to say. With me on this? So that's how your perception is. That's how your perspective is you've got all these layers of you that kind of change the glasses that you look through. So it's going to be, yes, your generation, but it's also going to be your gender, your race, your socioeconomic status. Would you agree that people who are raised with different kinds of money have different, whether you have any military background, what's your birth order, what's your personality, what part of the country were you raised in? All these things give you your particular lens. And the problem is that we forget that other people are walking around with different glasses than we are. And so once you kind of look at that and you go, oh, now you can look at it and go, maybe this person's not just like living to piss me off. Maybe this is because it totally makes sense in their head. Okay? So no matter where I go in the country, I will run into someone and they will say something like this. Oh my gosh, Kristen, millennials and their participation trophies. Who bought the participation trophies? It wasn't the millennials, it was their hippie parents, right? They're the ones that went to PTA and was like, competition's getting too intense, I want my kid to frolic. That was their fault. And what's funny is those same 60-year-olds are now so mad that their employees can't reach their fullest potential, don't know what excellence is. Yeah, because you gave them a trophy for being the worst player on the worst team in the worst league, and they still got a reward. It's going to mess with your idea of excellence. You follow me on this? So what we have to understand is everything that you don't like about every single generation, we made. We made every single bit of it, and once you get comfortable with that, you'll spend less time being mad at the people around you, okay? All right, so I'm going to give you a second to look at this, otherwise we'll just compulsively do it anyway. But I want you to figure out where you are. We're going to slap a big fat label on you, okay? Where are you? I want you to figure out where your partner is, your children, your parents, and the person at work that drives you the most up the wall. Okay, everybody, very rarely is that person actually in your age group, by the way. Okay, everybody got it? You got your big labels we're going to work with today? Okay, cool. So let's nerd out some. So when we look at generations, one of the problems is that many people look at them not in the micros, they look at them in the macro. They look at them in the 20-year span. Now remember I told you parenting style and decade is what affects your perspective on the world. So here's the problem. People get lumped together who shouldn't actually be lumped together. So let's just use the baby boomers, for example. The oldest group of that would have been children during the 1950s, and the second group would have been children during the 1960s. Did the United States of America look the same in the 50s as it did in the 60s? No. 70s, 80s? 90s, 2000s? So you see the problem. When you go with too big of numbers, what normally happens is we spend a lot of time researching the front half of the generation, and then we make assumptions about the second half of the generation. And that's not usually how it is. So this is why if you've heard the second half, if you're raised in the second half, you've heard the first half and you're like, yeah, that's not me. That doesn't represent me whatsoever. It's because each generation is actually slightly different. And one of the ways that you can kind of think about it is like a sibling pair, okay? So the oldest sibling is usually the trailblazer. They're the one that comes in and changes the path. Kick down doors, they're the first ones to do things big. That's sort of the nature of the oldest child. So what we see is that the first half of a generation almost always changes the nation economically. They change the kinds of work we do, right? So you think about Gen Xers, that's Silicon Valley. Millennials have brought in gig economy. Follow me on this? They change the kinds of work we do. The second half, have you ever noticed it's always the younger child that wants to get together for Thanksgiving? And it's always the older child who's like, please God, no, I hate all of you. Don't make me do that. Okay, fine, I'll bring the wine. Right? Like, we don't want to do it. Do we have to get drunk to tolerate everybody? So what we've seen is it's usually the second half who's about like holidays and traditions and family time. And so what we see happen is the second half of the generation usually changes the nation socially. So they change who gets to work. Right? So we see this pattern happen over and over and over again. We change the kind of work we do, we come in and we decide the next generation who's going to work, how's it going to be fair. So this is part of why, my friends, we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion at a higher level right now, because you have the second half of the generation who's really passionate about it in a way that the first half was not. Follow me on this? So now DEI has suddenly become an attraction, retaining, retention thing in a way that it wasn't even 10 years before. Because you've got a generation of people now who say, if I don't see myself represented, it's cool, my mom's basement's really nice, she lets me stay there for free, I don't gotta work here. Okay? Everybody with me? Okay. So we'll see that pattern happen again. We won't spend a lot of time on the first and the last groups. The first thing I need you to know about them is that you might not have them here on base, but they're still running all your legislature, all right? All of your politics is still coming. And the problem is that people make rules that they think are good for their particular generation of people, okay? So they're going to do things based on what they want. And it's interesting because, again, if you watch childhoods, you can see why they do some of the weird things that they do. So traditionalists would have been children during the Great Depression and would have been some of the first people to volunteer to go off to World War II, okay? So this is why, if you're working with anybody in their 90s, the first question is always, how much? Can we do it for less? Or does it create jobs? It's always going to be about the money when somebody in that line is running the decisions, okay? And that's why when you go to great-grandma's or grandma's house and like they wash off the aluminum foil after Thanksgiving, or they have like jars of baby food, like the baby food jars full of like nuts and bolts and crap like that, right? That 100% comes from having a period of time where they had nothing. So the idea was save everything and make every dollar stretch as far as you possibly can. But the second half of it is that they were some of the first people to volunteer to go to World War II. Now remember, when we got to World War II, when we finally got in, we went really fast. And so we had to acclimate really people from all over the country, different education backgrounds. Nothing was standardized at that point in time. We had to get everybody on the same page really, really fast. And the best way to do that is with really strict rules, right? If I have really strict rules and I can make you literally run till you throw up, I can get you to conform significantly faster. Now here's the problem. In majority of companies across this country, we can't look at Brittany and say, you're 10 minutes late, take a lap. Right? We can't do that. HR does not approve. So we're having a bit of a situation with this very military style idea of, I set the rule, there's a heavy consequence for you to have it. So that's why it's interesting, because the traditionalists, they would have been the bosses of the baby boomers, and they came down hard on those boomers. And everything had some sort of rule, regulation, and punishment that went along with it. And so what's funny is that you can call that person in and say, do it or you're fired, and they'll totally do it. Yes, sir, no, ma'am. They'll immediately do whatever you want. But their child, the millennial, will be like, why? Why do we have to do that? I don't think that's fair at all. I don't want to do that. Pendulum swing. It's going to happen over and over and over and over again. The traditionalists didn't talk to their baby boomer children. Children were to be seen and not heard. So what happens is those boomers talk the heck out of their kids. And that's why all of your young employees want to have a conversation about everything. And you're like, just do it. Just do it. I don't need to, just do it. Right? You feeling me? Okay. So, silent. Now, silent is one of my favorite ones because they were children during World War II. And so everything for them is about loyalty and sacrifice. And so one of the best things, the best way I can describe it is, you know how like when you work for anything for like a period of time, they'll give you like a weird trinket, like you've been here for 10 years, they'll give you like a pin, right? And if you're a Gen X, you're like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this now? Or they'll give you like a little clock that has Air Force level emblazoned in it, and now you're like, crap, I can't even yard sale this now. Right? That is 100% the silent generation. They love that junk. Anything that proves how long they've been somewhere, where they were. So that shirt, the whole getting a polo shirt with whatever it is embroidered in it, and then you know they give it to you like it's this huge honor. And you're like, man, just give me the embroidery money. I could go to Chipotle with that. Like, we don't want it in the same way. But for them, everything is about being able to display that you're part of the bigger cause, that you're loyal, and being able to prove what you know. So being able to have all those trophies and trinkets and coins and all that, that all comes from the silent generation being able to prove things. Cool? You understand them a little bit better? Okay. We're going to talk a lot about boomers, Gen Xers, millennials. We'll talk about them in a second. But let me talk to you real quick about Gen Alphas. Number one, please don't hire them right now. It's very illegal. Okay? So here's the thing. If you look at Strauss and Howe, they basically say that every fourth generation, some sort of big disaster happens, and we reset as a culture. Right? Did any big weird disaster just happen across the whole entire world? Yeah, okay, so the last time we had a really big, huge result, globalized reset was in World War II, which was the last time there was a reset, okay? So we've had minor resets, so you think about like even with 9/11, it really impacted cities, but not so much rural farms in Wisconsin. They pretty much did whatever they were doing before, okay? So it didn't have the global sort of scale. But it's interesting because now you've got Gen Alphas who've all had a very similar experience. At the very least, they'll wash their hands significantly more than any boomer ever did over their whole entire life. Okay? So right now you're looking at them and you're like, whoa, these people are like on TikTok, and they're like, right? They're like eating Tide Pods, and it's not looking great for the future of humanity. But I promise you, they should be your next greatest generation, okay? It's coming, should be awesome. What should happen is millennials and Gen Zs will run the framework for them, very much like traditionalists and silent did, and then you'll have, or the greatest generation directly prior to that, the GI generations that ran a lot of that, and then a lot of big changes happened. And you can already see, here's the thing, we're still in the churn, right? During World War II, when they were in it, they didn't know the impact it was going to have on women being able to work, or minorities being able to have equal pay. They didn't know that in the churn. But right now, we're still in the drama. So it'll only be able to look back. I mean, we can look at it already and say the Great Resignation is going to have massive impact in the way that we work. So we can see that. Anybody have any kids in this last category? Okay, let me tell you what I think is the funniest about them. They are the stingiest people I have ever met in my whole entire life. They will spend your money until their head falls off and will not drop one dime of their own money to get that little thing at the Mexican restaurant, right? The little coin, or they won't spend any of their money whatsoever on it. They all have like $450 in a sock hidden somewhere in their room. But it's interesting, a lot of that, if you think about where the numbers are, the oldest part of that generation would have been children during the Great Recession. So their parents would have been part of the first hired, first fired. So like if you think about this is the generation where we looked at them and said Santa Claus is bringing three toys and one of them's a book, right? Where you look right here with Gen Zs and we're like, how many iPods do you want? Right? It's a really big difference between those two, and a lot of it comes with just how things dropped out with the economy. So they should be pretty darn cool. At the very least, they should be better at time management, which we haven't had anybody good at time management in a good 20 years. But think about this. This is a group of people when parents were having to work at home in particular, they couldn't stop what they were doing to spoon feed the children. Kids had to get where they were supposed to be online, the times that they were supposed to. Deadlines got much more heavily enforced. So at the very least, there's some idea of keeping your time that hasn't happened in a while. All right. They will get renamed, by the way. The two names I've heard most right now are Coronials, which I like. I think it's okay. But my favorite is Quarantine-agers. Like, I'm really rooting for the Quarantine-agers to make it. But generations get a letter until they begin calling themselves a name. And Gen X, we're still called Gen X. You know why? Because we don't give a crap what you call us. Write our paycheck. Right? We are not collective, we're not friends, we're not on the same team. Please, God, don't make us go to a Christmas party. Like even the ones that you go into a ball, it's mostly because your wives wanted to dress up at this point in time. Like it's not for you, you hate it. So see, it's just true. It's just true, no matter where we go in the country, it's just true. We don't like humans, stop making us. So when all these people are very drunk in about 24 hours, you'll know why. Okay. Okay, so why does this even matter to you? Why does this matter to the Air Force? Why does this matter to Little Rock? So when we look at the breakdown of the generations, so what we did here is we took the U.S. Census. Now remember, you guys, we did the U.S. Census in January of 2020. And then what happened in March of 2020? COVID dropped. So now all of a sudden, all the numbers that you actually have are not even the most accurate numbers that you have. So traditionalists, again, we're going to look at 20-year spans because it's easier to do big data and larger numbers. Traditionalists make up about 7% of the population. They were always kind of small, but they also had a lot of childhood diseases, so that's another thing for you to remember. Boomers, you make up 24% of the population. Boomers, you did not make up 64% of the population anymore. Y'all lived hard, okay? You used to put baby oil on your body when you were teenagers to lay out in the sun. You smoked while you were pregnant to stay thin, okay? So you can Botox that as much as you want to. Your systems are still hurting. So the thing is that in America, you've got to have two things to have power. In America, you have to have the majority and you have to have the money. Well, guess which generation has had the majority and the money their whole entire lives? It's always been the boomer. So anybody who has been a legitimate threat to that boomer, millennials, has to be put in their place. So that's why the real drama you see in your office is always between the millennials and the boomers. They're in a power struggle because of money and majority. And that's why Gen Xers, we've never had any power, right? That's why we look at everybody and we're like, Marsha, 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 right? I hate all of you and I magically get my work done, right? So it's the drama between these two groups, but it's because of power threat. Boomers are never going to get to a point where they're like, oh, you want to be in charge now? Here you go. Like, that's just not in the nature of us. So that's why the bump ups happen the most frequently between those particular two generations. So Gen Xers were 24%, and will only get smaller from here on out. And then millennials, Gen Z, millennials are the largest generation we've ever had, bigger by almost 8 million than the birth rate of the boomers. So they're huge, huge. Now, they don't know it in the same way the boomers did because they never went to school with 40 kids in their kindergarten classroom. They didn't have those same sort of kids being all together at a local park. They didn't have a lot of those places where they see kids in the same sort of majority. I don't know how they can have 25,000 followers on Snapchat or whatever and not know they're big, but they don't seem to know. But do they have the money still? Nope. Right? They still live in mom and daddy's basement, okay? So what's interesting though is that the front end of the millennials are what we call elder millennials, and that's going to be your 30 to 35-year-olds. And a lot of people forget how old millennials are. So the way that I describe it is your elder millennials are people that when they get out of a chair now, they go, ugh. That's the best way to know if you cross over into the line of elder millennial world, okay? And those people are getting money, and they're starting to buy houses, and they're finally having children, but they're doing a lot of those things along the way that we're starting to happen. So we're actually seeing the competition intensify. In particular, you can see it in the world of politics. It seems like it's an all-out war between those people who are in their 60s and 70s and the people in their early 30s. It's because of the threat to power. Everybody follow that? Okay. And then you've got Gen Alphas coming up hot in the background, and you're like, oh my gosh, Kristen, that means we're going to have two big generations back to back. No, we are not. Do the majority of millennials plan on having children? No, they're going to have dogs. Right? Lots of dogs, and that's why some of you are riding around already with a I love my granddog sticker on the back of your car. So they'll be small, pendulum swings, right? Large generation, small generation, it'll happen over and over and over again forever. Already, I've done some preliminary research with the Gen Alphas, and already we're seeing things like they're thinking about having kids again, they're wanting to get married earlier. It's really an interesting change we're starting to see. So that means that the most important thing here is that about 45% of the American population is currently under 35. So I'm going to let that stat just slap you in the face for a quick second, because the majority of the country, especially I would say government-based business, does not operate as if this is true, right? Instead, what happens is we look around and we tell all the young people, you figure out how to play our game or you can just get out of here. Nope. We figure out how to attract and retain the top, or we cease to exist. These people just killed taxis, something that had been around since the 1800s. They Uberized them, right? You can do your annual physical from your phone in your car with your doctor now. That's very different than what we've had before. So we have to figure out what we can do to bring the top. Now listen, there's tons of them. Remember, there's massive. So we don't have a situation where like, just take them, anybody's better. No. There's lots of them. If they're garbage, kick them to the curb, right? There's plenty to pick from, but we do have to figure out how to attract and retain the top so that we don't get left behind in the decision-making process. And it's important for you to know, let me go back to this for just a second. So the most recent AARP survey that I saw said about 70-year-olds, this is the first part of the baby boomers, about 38% of them plan to quote-unquote die at their desk. They legitimately checked a box that said, die at my desk, okay? So they have a job, and I hope you understand that a little bit more in a second. But the thing is that Gen Xers, we do not have that need, do we? Across the country, the number that I see Gen Xers leaving at is 57. Most of us plan on retiring by 57, and we don't care what's happening with y'all, we're going to be like deuces, right? I don't care what's happening, I don't have any pride of ownership anymore, I will sell my mom's china, and I will move to Costa Rica if I have to. I am not doing this garbage the rest of my life. So what's interesting is that a lot of organizations, when they think about succession planning, right now they're looking at their 51, 52, 53-year-olds, and they're like, they're going to be the next future of the company. No, they're not. They're going to be leaving. Instead, it really needs to be your zennials, people in their 40s, and people who are in their early 30s. That's your next middle managers. Those are the ones we really need to be focused on in teaching how to lead, moving forward, recruiting, things like that. Those are the main ones that we need to be thinking of. So I'm not saying that you have to ignore Gen Xers, but let's be real, we're not going to be happy one way or another, are we? We're always going to be a little bit salty. So, you need to focus at this point in time a little bit more on how you're going to attract and retain this next group of people, okay? All right, so another way for you to think about it is this. Have any of you ever been to the Kentucky Derby before? Anybody been to the Derby? Okay, if you've not been, you should really go. It is this very weird American tradition that we have. And the main thing that makes it weird is that everybody really dresses up, even though it rains every single year, okay? So in 2017, I went to the Kentucky Derby, and oh my God, I was so cute. Okay, so here's the thing you must understand about 2017. 2017 was the rainiest Kentucky Derby in the history of Kentucky Derbies. So I started off like that, and I ended up like this. I literally bought a trash bag off a guy for $1, right? So here's the interesting thing. The only way for me to get out of the rain, because every single space has a dollar amount attached to it, the only way for me to get out of the rain was to go and bid on more horses. That was it. So I would literally go under and look for the longest lines that I could to stay out of the rain for a longer period of time. So here's another thing you might not know if you've never been on a horse before. There's a certain way you have to say it. And if you don't say your bid correctly, everyone around, you're out. Everyone knows that you don't know what you're doing. So I do it wrong. The guy behind me is like, hey, just so you know, the horse that you're bidding on right now is hot. And I'm like, I have no idea what that means. He says, well, when you look at the paperwork, the horse is still slated to lose. It still doesn't look like it's going to win. But in the 1 or 2 races directly prior to this, it's either placed or shown. So I would suggest you put the $20 bill down on the horse. Don't put down your $5. And I'm like, oh, you're sweet. I'm saving my money for the big race, right? So I played it really safe, and I put down the $5. Y'all, if I would have put down the $20 bill, I would have made $160 on that race. But I played it safe, right? And I made $10. Hey, I got a tip on a hot horse. It's the millennial generation. 100% guaranteed to run. Organizations who decide to put down a 20 are going to find a significantly higher rate of return than the companies that play it safe and do the bare minimum to be able to attract, and I can show you with census projections. So here's what we did here. In 2020, I took U.S. Census, and what we did is look at eligible workforce. So you think about 16 to 66. And yes, I know people are working past that, but I had to have some number to cut it off. So if you look at eligible workers, 19% of eligible workers fell in boomer category, 37% were Gen X. Who are the majority of your eligible workers already in 2020? Who was it? Millennials. All right. Let's go 30 years in the future. Boomers, gone. Some of them will still be working. I don't know how. I don't think they'll be driving, and they're terrified to get into Uber because they're convinced those people are going to kill them, right? And I've seen them try to get on a regular conference call, so I'm thinking holographs will be out of the question. Gen Xers, remember, we are peace out, we are gone. These are literally the only 2% who own their business still working in here. And who is still the majority of your eligible workers 30 years down the road? Still millennials. And then Gen Z's coming up right there behind them. Y'all, this generation is so big, the birth rate and death rate on either side is expected to balance. So that makes them a really, really smart investment, right? That's how you create sustainability, is by making sure that your next great set of leaders is ready to do the leading that they need, right? Instead, what we have a tendency to do is we've got Rhonda in payroll, who's 63, right? And is mad all the time, and we're terrified of getting Rhonda mad, and so we give her whatever she wants. You follow me on this? You cannot make decisions based on Rhonda and payroll anymore, because you will not have sustainability. So you're going to be mad no matter what. Okay, everybody with me on this? Say you got it, say yes.
Yes.
Not a question anymore of should we, it's a have to. We're in a have to situation. Okay, so let's talk about some of these weird rules and why people have a tendency to fight against them. So one of the first rules that we have, so here's the thing, you get this. I work with so many organizations that don't have anybody military in their life at all, so they don't even understand this. So you know that in the military, clothing equals power, right? I can literally look at your outfits right now, and based on your patches and your stripy things and your pointy hat, flat hat, slouchy hat, whatever it is, I can look at you and be like, that dude's in charge of me. So if I'm in a foxhole and nobody can talk, I can look at your clothes and know who's in charge. So what happens is that, remember, all those traditionalists came from World War II, and their dads and uncles would have come from World War I, okay? So they pick up that idea of clothing equals power, and they drop it on top of the American workforce. And they tell all the, mostly men at the time, that in order to be respected in any way, you must put on an undershirt, a long sleeve button-down shirt, a jacket, a tie, pants, please God wear underwear, wool socks, shoes, a belt, and a watch. 10 pieces of clothing. Y'all, you live in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's hot up in here. The devil's like, no, hard pass. Not interested. So what's interesting is that we think that you've got associates your clothing with power naturally. They're never going to look at you in your suit and be like, oh my God, you look so powerful. Tell me what to do, pinstripe man. They're going to look at you and say, aren't you hot? You're going to be like, yes, I am hot. They're going to be like, I'm sorry, aren't you in charge? But what you have to understand is where the boomers, those traditionalists, beat that concept into them that clothing equals power so hard that now when they have a Gen Z coming in with a purple streak in their hair and 14-inch long eyelashes and a nose ring or whatever, they're like, you don't want to be taken seriously. Don't you want to be seen as powerful? And Gen Xers were like, I don't care what you do. Turn your work in on time. I don't care. It's the division between clothing being equal to power versus now you've got Gen Zs that walk in and they're like, you can't even turn your computer on. So I don't care what your rank is. You're still a dum-dum. Got it? They don't see it. So clothing is one of the places where I think we'll continue to have friction, especially I think you're going to find this on a military base when you have civilians. Your civilians are more likely to push back, but you have you just have some luxury basically of being able to put somebody in a uniform and say it's for safety, even if it's not. So that's an important thing for you to know. Another thing you might have noticed about the younger generations is that they bounce hierarchy. They will skip hierarchy like this, and the best way for you to understand this is that especially those ones who are your younger millennials and your older Gen Zs, they come from the generation of flower children who are the most highly divorced generation in the whole nation. So they are used to playing mom against daddy, okay? So if I know that my boss is going to say no, I'm not going to waste my time with that nonsense. I'm going to go ahead and ask the person 3 ranks up who has just removed enough from the question and the situation to give me whatever it is that I want. But this is why, my friends, they CC you on stuff that has nothing to do with you. Right? And they're tattling. That's the best way to describe it. They're tattling. They want you to see it. And if you want them to stop, you're going to have to say, you're grown folks, handle your business. Don't bring me up on this. You just took 2 minutes of my life I can never get back. Because they will continue to copy you and tattle on you. But it's usually not malice. It's mostly based on the idea of expedience. If I know that you're not going to give me what I want, then it's not expedient for me to go to you. I'm going to go up and ask somebody else who's more likely to say yes. Got it? You get this idea? So if you're going to plug hierarchy, you have to explain why. You have to explain why it actually helps with workflow, whatever it is, not so much of I'm the boss and I said so. That's not going to work. Have you noticed that the younger generation refuses to look busy? Okay, hey Gen Xers, we're the best fake workers in the history of the world. We are so good. Every Gen Xer knows exactly what their boss sounds like when they walk down the hall, right? You know the exact cadence of her steps, and you go from like, I'm working, you hear, and you're like, I'm working! Hey, just over here working, right? And then she goes next door to the millennial, and the millennial's like, sup, how you doing? And you're like, oh my God, you stupid child. How dare you not fake work like the rest of us? Yeah. And millennials are like, yeah, you don't really pay me so much to do the fake work. It's not my problem that it takes you two weeks to do the PowerPoint. It takes me 2 hours to do. And you're right. You've got a generation of people who have legitimately Control-Alt-Deleted since they were second graders, right? They are able to do things faster. They know the sticky keys. They're doing things. But I can tell you the origin story of this, and you will nerd out about this. It's actually going to change the way you raise your own children. This is 100% the fault of No Child Left Behind. 100%. This is this one moment in time we can look at, okay? So here's what happens. Before No Child, so technically No Child Left Behind gets enacted in 2001, but if you were like a 90s kid, if you were in school around 90s, you remember they were already starting to segregate. So it was like low math, high math. Remember they were starting to kind of branch us out? But people who are boomers and above, and even some of the Gen Xers, that's not what happened. What would happen would be your teacher would build a packet based on your individual skills. So everybody did math at the same time, but what you were doing would be totally different worksheets, okay? So what would happen would be, you would do your worksheet, you would turn it into your teacher, and she would give you more work. So the boomer generation gets trained, work as slowly as humanly possible, always look like you're working so that people don't give you more work to do, okay? But that changes with No Child Left Behind. What happens now is every person, regardless of ability, does the same worksheet at the same time, okay? So now if I'm good at math, I'm going to go as fast as I possibly can to finish my worksheet because then I get free time. And I can do whatever the heck I want, until Billy Joe Bob pulls it together and finishes his math worksheet, right? And then we can all start over. And then how do we start over? The boss gives us more work. So they're used to finish your task as fast as you can, do whatever you want until your superior comes and gives you the next set of work to do. Hello, that's where it's coming from. It's not that they're lazy, they're just used to the idea of someone else coordinates your time, your tasks. So this is why your Gen Zs in particular, and a lot of your older millennials, love task lists. They love checklists. As a Gen Xer, if you gave me a checklist, I would quit. Right? I'd be like, how dare you micromanage me? Don't you think I know what I'm doing? And Gen Zs are like, please, for the love of all things holy, give me a checklist of what you want me to do. And it's interesting because I was just in Charleston and they were talking about, it's funny because right now it seems like the military is really very actively trying to de-standardize things. No, stop, go back, right? They want it. You've got a group of people who have very clearly been giving things like syllabi since they were second graders, right? They've been given tool lists. They've been given rubrics of exactly how you will evaluate them. They've been given all this sort of extreme task list of exactly what will happen, the weight of every project. They've been told exactly what to do and exactly how you're going to evaluate them. And so they like it in a different way than the very hyper-independent Gen Xers of the world do. Right? You follow me on this? But again, isn't it typical, right, that any government, that once we figure out what they actually want, then we're like, just kidding. You can't have that anymore. So that's sort of where we are right now. So Gen Xers will get unstandardized like we've been wanting, and then what doesn't matter, we're going to read that. Okay? So the last thing here that's a major point of contention that I see is the idea of being on time. Do you have any drama with this at all? Probably not as much as a lot of companies and organizations are. So here's the thing. For those of you millennials in the room, you might never have heard of this, but the rest of us used to do a thing called playing outside. It was very cool. We had about a 2-mile radius we could go in any direction, and there was one rule about when we were supposed to come home. When what happened? Come on, right? Hard and fast rule for real consequences if you weren't there. You were given the one tool you needed, which was your little Seiko watch, right? But what's happened was you got to figure out a lot of interesting things during that time. So you had a lot of time available to you, but you had a hard deadline. So what would happen would be you learn things like the street lights come on in the fall at a different time than they come on in the summer. You learn that, and then you learn it takes different time for you to get to Whitney's house than it does for you to get to Brian's house. And then you start learning how to buffer time, right? Because you start planning like what happens if the weird Doberman gets loose. So you ever had a weird Doberman that would chase you? Or you want to make a stop for the ice cream man. Like you started learning how to buffer your time. That is not what happens. You can go to any middle school in America and you're going to see the same pattern happen. Someone's going to pick that person up from school. It's actually quite rare for people to ride the bus at this point in time. That adult is going to look at the child and say, are you hungry? No, doesn't matter, snack time, all right? So that's one thing we're already teaching people to eat even when they're not hungry, which is going to mess people up even further, okay? So we declare that it is snack time, then we take them to activity number 1. We sit outside the ballet recital hall just in case someone snatches our baby. We work while we are off of work, right? Which is giving them, again, weird vibes about when exactly are you supposed to work and how do you draw lines. And then we come home and we say, it's dinner time, it's TV time, it's shower time, it's screen time. And now, if you don't get off the internet when we tell you to, we have an app that can literally shut down the whole internet. Now, when exactly are these babies learning how to do any kind of time? Because their day is completely monitored through school, their night is completely monitored through us, and now with the rise of club sports, most people are losing all Saturdays also. So they're not learning how to control their own time. So this would be one of the first things I would tell you whenever you have anybody new join your office. One of the first things you really want to teach them to do and check on is their natural time management skills. Do they have any idea how long it takes to accomplish a task, or are they going to oversell and you're going to be mad? Okay? Or do they say things like, oh, I'm right around the corner, and they're totally 30 minutes away? Right? With me on this? So here's what you have to understand. Time is very much like a language. When you learn it earlier in your life, it's easier to do for the rest of your life. So you have a whole lot of people that have learned absolutely nothing about time or why it matters. If you're going to put your foot down about it, you're going to have to explain why. Everybody got that? Say yeah. Yeah. Okay. So in the next little bit of time, let's kind of branch into the idea of that. But before that, let's say hey to the queen. Yeah? Okay. So the best way that I can describe generations for you is actually understanding the royal family. If you ever need to know this in the future. Gen Xers were basically Prince Charles. all right? The queen, sheer force of will was keeping her alive. She did it as long as she possibly could, right? And what's interesting is that everybody in the world, wanted to skip the guy in the middle and go on over to their pretty people, right? William and Kate. And that's us Gen X, we're just Charles, right? Now we've been forced into taking a power position. We'll do it for about 5 years. We'll make some more money and then we'll leave, right? That's pretty much how it's going to be. 100% if you ever have confusion, the royal family is the best way for you to think of. So let's get into ideas of like some of the weird stuff that you see with each one of the generations, and I can tell you sort of origin story. One of the first things that you have to know about the boomers and the flower children, especially the boomers, is that their parents were children during the Great Depression. They were those traditions, okay? So you always want what's better for your children, so what becomes the most important thing in the world for a boomer child to have? A job. And they don't have to be happy or fulfilled in any shape, form, or fashion. They must put bread on the table. Got it? Jobs become extremely important. The second side of that is those same men got off the boat from World War II, kissed mama, and made 3 times the amount of babies. So now you have 3 times the amount of people who have all been told they must have a job, right? So this is why you create this ultra competitive group of people that we haven't been able to see since then, because there was a for real supply demand and extreme social pressure to have jobs. So the number one way that boomers fix this is they create the concept of a SME, right? You're a subject matter expert, so I want you to think about how this is actually genius. If you are the only person who knows how to do a particular thing, now nobody can fire you no matter how big of a jerk you are. Okay? So this is basically what they did. So this is how they got trained to hoard the information that's around whatever their specialty is. Okay? Because it's the number one way. If you look back for a second, that's brilliant. It's the number one way to protect your job. So here's what happens. So now you've got, let's go back to Rhonda and payroll, right? Rhonda's been there for 35 years. And every once in a while you start thinking, oh my gosh, Rhonda could just take all her knowledge with us and just leave whenever she wanted. What are we going to do? So every once in a while you bring in Brittany, right? You bring in a Brittany, and Rhonda's like, I ain't teaching Brittany nothing. I'm not telling her jack. She can work at double my speed and half my pay. So no. So Rhonda's mad, won't teach anything. Brittany's running around, nobody's teaching me anything. I don't have any future in this company. How am I gonna, right? You see where both of those are actually completely valid perspectives along the way. So this is why that happens. And so we're actually seeing there's sort of a trend towards generalists. The people who are generalists at this point in time are actually getting an advantage. So when you're thinking about the people that you've got in your department, remember you're actually doing them favors by moving them around to lots and lots of different areas to work with, because you're going to have people on either side that were such specialists. You need people in the middle that can generalize out. Okay? It's not a good thing. This is exactly how we've gotten ourselves into the situation that we are right now, where we're constantly panicking that the one person who knows something about that one missile is going to walk away. Okay? So boomers are super social people. In every office, you are going to have at least one 60-year-old that's what I call the chatter. You know what I mean by the chatter? You know who this person is? You're not 100% sure what they do for a living. They spend a lot of time standing in people's doorways like this, talking about college football, right? And what's so funny is that person will stand there and talk to you for 45 minutes about their grandchild's tap recital and will lose their mind when their new employee comes in 10 minutes late, right? Lose their mind. And that is because they see that social interaction as building culture. They see that as part of the job in a way that the rest of us do not. But it's because they crave it. They love it in a totally different way. So that's why you're seeing organizations that are really boomer heavy. So you think about like higher education, banking, law, they're all running back to their offices as fast as possible. It's because the boomers miss their friends. It's the bottom line. It's where they see people, they get to be social all day long, they're used to having habits of what they do in patterns, and so that's where the real want to is coming from. So what's interesting is that Gen Xers, we feel none of that. We don't need to have to hang out with you or need to see you in order to do our jobs. So this is sort of where you're seeing this standoff happen, is that for the first time ever, Gen Xers are saying, no, I'm not going to come back into an office. We've always basically done whatever anybody told us to do because we couldn't afford our house, right? So we'll do whatever they want. But now all of a sudden we're saying, no, we're not going to do that. And because the millennials are also very large, you've got a 2/3 majority. So that's how hybrid is now getting to become the conversation piece that we want. So just to kind of give you, I know you don't have that same situation here, but that's definitely giving you a little perspective along the way. Boomers love meetings. they live for them, right? Because it allows them to do their two favorite things, which is be around other people and check on the people they're responsible for. It allows them to do both of those things. So this is why, Gen Xers, and there's a lot of you in the room, have you ever noticed that a boomer will send you an email and then they'll walk down to your office and say, hey, Brendan, just letting you know that I sent you an email, right? And you're like, I know, I'm actively ignoring that email. That's why I like email, because I can do it on my own timeline. So a lot of it, what we see happen is that people speak in the height of the technology of their young adulthood. So phones would have been the high technology for the majority of boomers, so they're always going to prefer the face-to-face. But this is why when you have a traditionalist group, they will put you on a plane and fly you across the country to breathe your air. They love that face-to-face, so the older the person is, the more likely they are to need to see your face along the way, and the younger they are, the least likely they are. The big thing I would tell you here is that whenever you're interacting with somebody from a different generation, if you need something, right? Same thing for me. I prefer emails. Just email. You're going to get me a whole lot faster along the way. Millennials, we see, prefer text mostly, and then we're seeing Gen Zs are, they like instant messenger software. So things that are like Slack or Microsoft Teams, you're seeing a lot of that. But the idea for that is that if they can't reach their primary expert, then they can get access to multiple experts. That's sort of the idea. They don't have to stall in order to do that. So that's why they're loving that more than ever before. Okay? All right, let's talk real quick about Gen Xers and Zennials. We won't spend a lot of time on this because quite honestly, we're not a problem. All right, so that's how it is. The main thing you have to understand about latchkey kids is that we are hyper-independent people. Super, super independent people, and if you try to micromanage us even a little bit, we do not mind faking stupidity in order to make sure that we don't have to do anything over and over and over again. So you have these people, you're like, someone takes over and they're like, I don't know how to do a pivot table. And you're like, you did it for the past 3 months? Well, I don't know now. I don't know how to pack a tray, right? Like all of a sudden we don't know. But if someone's going to just come back and redo it, like, what's the point? That's stupid. So we don't do that. A lot of this comes from being latchkey kids. Okay, millennials in the room, you might not understand this, but shall we just walk them through a day in our lives? So here's what would happen. When I was 6 years old, I walked down the hill from Vestavia Elementary School. I don't remember thinking I was ever going to get snatched or stabbed, but there was always an ice cream man that was going to kill us in the late 80s. That and Candyman and Bloody Mary were pretty much the scariest parts of my childhood. And then I would take a key from around my neck. And if I lost that key, my life was over, because apparently it was $1 billion to rekey a house, according to my parents. And then I would go to my kitchen and I would get an apple. And the apple was not pre-washed, was not pre-cored, was not organic. And somehow we all magically survived. And then with the sharpest knife my 6-year-old hands could find, I would hack into the apple. And if I cut my pinky off, nobody's coming home for minimum 3 hours. And the phone is literally bolted to the wall on the other side of the room. Okay? And then I would go to the pantry and I would get out a vat of Jif Extra Crunchy peanut butter. And I don't remember thinking about the sugar or the saturated fats, or if anybody was going to die from a peanut allergy later on when we were literally playing in the middle of the road. Remember when we screamed, car, right? The car keep going, you just keep right on throwing the football. And can you imagine kids doing that? They would never ever do that thing, okay? So we would do that. And then so I would sit down with my peanut butter apple and I would do my homework. Remember back in the day when children did their own homework? It was glorious, right? And if I made a 35 on my spelling test, I just shoved it to the bottom of the backpack because my parents didn't have to sign it, right? They didn't get an email that said, hey, your kid stunk at school today. I figured out how I was going to solve my own problem. Maybe I could go and bang some erasers for extra credit during PE. I figured it out. Nobody else knew. Because every 6 weeks, things were going to get really, really real. So I figured out how I was going to solve my own problem. Okay? So this is why so many of your Gen Xers are like, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. So when they have a Gen Z who comes in who seems to need clearance on every single course of action that they take, we're like, baby, I don't get paid to do my job and your job. Figure it out. Right? So there's a lot of frustration that happens between these groups of people because Gen Zs have been taught to always check in. Always check in with an authority figure before proceeding. And Gen Xers were trained, just make it happen. If it blows up, you'll figure a way out. Okay? And then, after I was done with my homework, I would go downstairs and I would watch Saved by the Bell. Saved by the Bell would tell me how to be a good person. right? Now, unfortunately, all those sitcoms gave us a slightly skewed view of reality. Jesse Spano can get off drugs in 30 minutes, right? So, not so much great. And then also, every 35 minutes, there'd be a commercial break that would tell you if you just bought the next thing, you'd finally be happy. So we were buying Guess jeans and Tree Torrent, right? We were doing all of the things, and we still are in that situation of the next thing's finally going to make us happy, right? So we go on to the next house and the next car and the next wife, right? So we see that happen quite a lot. All right, got it? That's latchkey kids. They're going to be salty no matter what, so just do the best you can. Okay? We are antisocial people. Please don't make us hang out with you. That's all you really need to know. By the way, stop taking us out for lunch for our birthday. That is not a present. That's called unpaid work time. Okay? Retiring at 57, so again, make sure you have a plan. And then they're more likely to avoid phone calls. Most Gen Xers have a red light beeping on their phone. There could be 1, there could be 400. They have no idea at this point in time. They batch check their emails, but very rarely check voicemails. Boomers do the opposite of that. Okay. So let's talk about the people we messed up the absolute worst, which is the millennials. So for millennials, the elder millennials are the most hated generation in the history of the world. We talk a lot of crap about people who will eventually take care of us in a nursing home, so it doesn't backfire on all y'all. I'm moving to Costa Rica, remember, so it won't be a problem for me. But one of the worst things we did is we created a thing called play dates. Now, if you've never been on a play date, congratulations, you have not visited the 7th circle of hell, okay? Essentially what a play date is my kid likes this other kid, and now I'm forced to sit with their weird parent for the next 2 hours and make conversations. That never happened when we were growing up. So I'm going to, tell me your first name. Nick. Okay, so Nick and I think are sort of close to the same age. I think you might be a little younger than me, but we're going to play this game anyway. Okay. So what would happen would be growing up, if we lived in the same neighborhood, 2-mile radius, I would go over to Nick's house. Nick's mama didn't know I was there. Nick's mom was already day drinking by the time I got there. She didn't know. There was no, until somebody drew blood, there was no parents involved. Okay? So I'd go over to Nick and I'd be like, hey Nick, what do you want to play? And he'd say, how about Spider-Man? And I'd say, okay, I'll be Spider-Man. He'd say, no, I'll be Spider-Man. And I'd say, no, I'll be Spider-Man. He'd say, no, I'll be Spider-Man. You know what we would do? We'd just fight. We'd solve our own problem. Dominance and submission would be established, or I'd take my ball and go home. One way or another, the kids handled their business, right? There was no other adults coming in and putting adult solutions on. That's not what would happen now in a play date. So now what happens is the parents hear the children arguing. Nobody wants to admit that their child is the spoiled brat. And so instead what happens is they come over and they say, what's going on? And Nick says, I want to be Spider-Man. And you say, I want to be Spider-Man. And the parents say, oh, this is very easily solved. Here's what we'll do. Nick, you can be Spider-Man for 30 minutes. And then Kristen, you can be Spider-Man for 30 minutes. See, it's all fair. So now you got a 25-year-old walking into your office, looking at you and saying, I've been here 8 months. Time to make me Spider-Man. And you're like, I will die in this web, right? You can be Venom, but you sure as hell ain't gonna be Spider-Man, okay? So this is the problem, is that we took a whole group of people and we trained them that they were going to get their turn, that things were going to be fair and they were going to get balanced. And that's not true. People get promoted who really should never be in charge of humans ever, right? This happens all the time. There's all kinds of weird intricacies about how people move along. And so this is one of the things we've done, is we've distorted the idea of how fast you can move, how smart they actually are, when they need to be promoted, what goes along with the soft skill in particular. You know this. You get hired for your hard skills, but you get fired for your soft skills, right? And as you go up the ranks, it's your soft skills, your leadership skills that need more and more development. Conflict resolution, listening more effectively, that's the stuff that needs to be refined. So the problem is that we have told these people, STEM. We took out things like future leaders, business leaders of America. We took out things like shop class, where if you didn't meet your deadline, you just failed the whole semester. We took a lot of this out of the schools where they were learning the idea of a well-rounded life. And we said, if you can pass this standardized test, then you can move up faster. And that's really not what it is in life. A lot of times your brain is not linked necessarily to your professional path. In my opinion, there's only 2 people you need to be hiring at this point in time. Okay, any goal for you, Becca, ready? In any interview, you're only trying to find out 2 things. Are they teachable and are they tolerable? If you are teachable or tolerable at this point, you are hired, baby. You're who I need. I don't care what I don't care where your degree is. I don't care what you've done. I don't care what you've seen at this point in time. If you can't be taught new things because new softwares, new concepts are coming out all the time, if you have to have your way all the time or you melt down, I don't need you right now. And if you are so toxic in your attitude that you ruin the bunch of apples that you're around, I don't want you. Teachable and tolerable. So stop asking dumb questions in your interview and things like, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. I tell them what to say, right? I tell them to say things like, you know, sometimes I think I just care too much. I'm just too focused on my work, right? Stop. That's my job as a communications professor. So instead, you need to find out things like, can they self-sacrifice? That's a huge part of what your job is, right? So say things like, tell me the last time that you did something for someone else and expected nothing in return. Hey, now I can find out if you're teachable and tolerable, okay? So ask those questions that are going to get to the heart of, can they self-motivate? If they're having a bad day, can they rattle themselves out of it? That's a huge, can they prioritize their life? Can they listen to a boring briefing and still pull out the information that they needed to get to do their job that day? That's what we're really looking for now more than ever when you're building your teams, okay? Another thing that we see with Gen Zs is they're not ultimate risk takers. So let me kind of give you a good example here. Do you guys remember there used to be 12-foot tall aluminum slides? And there was literally a concrete pad of those things. And if you got scraped up, you had a big strawberry or raspberry or whatever. That was the badge of honor, right, for your childhood. So what's interesting is that you had to make a decision, especially if you lived in the Southeast, whether it was worth the street cred for you to go down that 12-foot slide in the summer and potentially get a third-degree burn. And if you did get hurt, you would go to your mom and she'd be like, I'm hurt. She, again, didn't sue the school system, did she? She was like, dummy, why'd you go down the slide? It's fine. We've taken all of that away. They're 6-foot tall slides. They're all made out of plastic. It's literally rubber on the bottom. A lot of the idea of safe risks we've removed from the opportunity. People don't know how to safely take a risk in the same way. So this is why you're more likely to have Gen Zs constantly checking in with you and saying, well, what would you do in this situation? And how would you do this? And you're like, just try it. Just blow it up. That's how I learn. And they are just like, nope, not going to do that. So just understand that that's where it comes from. It's not that they don't think you're capable. It's that they've been somehow mentally trained to check before they do almost anything. There's always some adult that comes in and approves their actions, right? Even if you try to think about it, you go to playground now, and the kid runs backwards up the slide, literally the only fun part about being on the slide now, some adult will come out of somewhere and be like, oh, be careful, honey. You don't want to hurt yourself. Right? You with me on this? So that hyper-risk sensitivity is a big deal. Another thing you might have noticed is that they're super casual with you. This is because their parents are their best friends. I don't understand this as a Gen Xer. Like, I would never hang out with my parents on purpose. And I do. You go to restaurants and you see all these 30-year-olds just living their best life with their parents, going on vacations with them, and I'm like, unless you're paying, no. Right? Not going to happen. But this is one of the interesting things, too. A part of why that hierarchy and that hyper-informality happens. I found it's better to kind of Heisman them, right? You don't want to get too deeply involved in their life because what you don't want to do is cross over into what I call the office parent, okay? You've got to be really careful of becoming the office parent in any kind of group because they'll take advantage of it. So example of what something as an office parent might do is they send an email out to everybody on the team saying, we're going to have a meeting at 3 o'clock tomorrow. First thing in the morning, they call everybody. Don't forget we're going to have a meeting at 3 o'clock in the morning. An hour before the meeting, they walk by everybody's office. Hey, don't forget, meeting in an hour, right? That's office mama stuff. Why does that person ever need to read and be responsible for their own emails if some other human's always going to come around and tell you what you need to do, right? So what I have found overwhelmingly, millennials and Gen Zs do really well when you set a really clear standard and you hold the line. Example, you live in the South. In the South, we have Chick-fil-A. If I go to any Chick-fil-A in this country and I say the words thank you, what are they going to say to me?
My pleasure.
My pleasure, every time. So you're telling me I can get a 16-year-old acne-faced kid to stand out in 100-degree heat and 1,000% humidity and say my pleasure to every single person, and you can't get somebody to meet a deadline? Bull. The problem is that you're not clear and you don't hold your lines. You keep backing your lines up over and over again. Instead, what I have found works really well, let's just use the Air Force example here, is you say, we're Air Force, we're as high as we go, you're the top of the top, the smartest of the smart. That line will not be backing up, right? I will get you whatever you need to be successful here. You need online classes, you need a mentor, whatever it is you need, I will get you there. But this is the line, and this is what excellence looks like here, and you better come and get it. That's when they do well. It's when you keep backing it up, changing deadlines, being wishy-washy about what a rule is from minute to minute. It's when things are ambiguous, when they're nebulous, that we actually see them not knowing where they stand. So onboarding becomes a really important part of this entire process. Okay, this might be the most important thing you learned today. So, I want you to think about, in every office, so let me kind of backstory on this. So my daughter has a teacher, her name is Joni Ogle. And every time she teaches anything new, she looks at the students and says, okay everybody, struggle time. And for the next 30 minutes, nobody can ask her any questions. They can't ask each other any questions. They just struggle to find out the answer on their own. Now, I want you to think about the person that drives you the most crazy at work. Chances are part of why that person drives you crazy is because they ask you questions all the time that they could find the answer to if they just took 20 seconds of their life to find it out. But you have become their living, breathing Encyclopedia Britannica, right? And now I want you to think about how good you're going to feel if the next time that person calls, you say, struggle time, click. Now, if you are an EMT, please don't do this, okay? But the majority of what you do is not, you're not in ops right now, right? The majority of what you do on a day-to-day basis doesn't have to have an answer in the next 30 minutes. You could be struggle timing to find people to get their own answer. That's how you empower employees to find their own futures, right? If you become the only resource, if you become the SME, yes, it might help you, but those jokers are going to interrupt your day all day long. You'll never get to a good flow, and then you'll have to do your work at the ballet practice of your child. So instead, start getting comfortable with the concept of struggle time, where you say literally something like, you know what, I can give you this answer, Brian, but I'm going to struggle time you. Because I think that if you find this answer, you're more likely to learn it. It's going to help you be a better leader down the road. So I'm going to struggle time you. If you don't have it in 2 hours, come back to me, or 2 days, or whatever it is, the time that you think they actually need to flex. Obviously, if you're in an emergency situation, you don't do this, but the majority of time in your day-to-day business, you stop everything and give this person their content, and they will come to you over and over and over and over and over again. Okay? The other thing is that it helps with the concept of delayed gratification, which is really, really important at this point in time, especially in the military, where you do a whole lot of hurry up and wait, right? And that's a really complicated concept for a lot of Gen Zs, the idea that I have to hurry up, we gotta get this proposal and we gotta get this done, and then you hear nothing, crickets for 8 months, right? They don't know how to cope with that, so you're teaching them this idea of sometimes you don't get your answer right away, and that's okay. Struggle time, change your life. Everybody got to say yes. Yes. I want that on a sign next time I come out here. Okay. The next thing that we really did here with them is we messed them up on self-esteem. We literally told this group of people they could do anything and be anything if they just wanted it hard enough. If they just tried hard enough. You could be anything you want when you grow up. That's a lie. I want to be a supermodel. That's not going to work out for me, right? Only because I'm not tall enough. It has nothing to do with my face. But the bottom line is that if you tell a group of people that if they just work hard enough, if they just want it, if they just spend enough time on it, you're going to distort their viewpoint on self-esteem. So here's the thing. Zennials, people that are in our 40s, we were starting to get into a little bit of trouble across the nation. So we were seeing gang rates going up, teen pregnancy was going up, drug rates were going up. So the National Board of Education comes with this brilliant idea. They're going to come in and they're going to put self-esteem classes in all of the elementary schools. And then if the kids feel good about themselves, they won't join gangs. And that did not work out, did it? Now they just feel really good about their drug problem. Okay? So this is the problem. Sometimes what happens is if you don't have an actual opportunity to gain real self-esteem, if all you've had is faux self-esteem, when you don't win, it hits you in the face in a totally different way. Real self-esteem comes from doing hard things. So if you have somebody that's a little too tentative, a little too overconfident, the best thing you can do for them is to give them a hard task and keep saying, I know you can do it, I know you can do it, I know you can do it, right? And then when they actually accomplish it, praise the heck out of them so that they'll continue to do those particular behaviors. But real self-esteem comes from overcoming, okay? So telling people that they're good enough, smart enough, and doggone it, people like you is a lie. Stop doing that, okay? Especially because some of you got kids you don't even like, much less their future bosses. All right, the last thing I want to talk to you about in our last 30 minutes is the idea of excellence. So this is one of the main places where we really mess millennials up, is this concept of excellence. So the first thing, the millennials in the room, you will not believe that this used to exist. So boomers tell them this is true. What used to happen is a boomer would take a test. The teacher would then put their name and all of the names of their classmates and their scores. And they would take that piece of paper and they would stick it to the outside wall of the classroom. Okay? So that everybody who's walking by is like, ooh, Nick made a 43, right? So you have a little bit of peer pressure, which may or may not have been good for Nick. But the other big thing is that Nick could look at the list and see where he stacked up against his peers. Y'all, they never see this information. High school, college, they have no idea why one person makes a 97 and another person makes a 93. They have no idea why one person makes $50,000 and another person makes $30,000. They don't know. And that's why you can go in your office right now and hand every single person there a piece of paper and say, give yourself an A, B, C, or D. And what letter are most people going to give themselves? An A. And you're like, you're a solid C minus, baby. No. But they're distorted, right? We don't know this idea. So here's the problem. When we're not really clear about what our standards are, when we don't have the idea of this is what the star person looks like, when we're not clear about that, we don't promote it, then you're going to have a hard time getting anybody else to reach up to whatever that standard is. So that's one of the big things I want you to get good at, is teaching them the difference for you between average, good, and great. Make sure you're having these conversations. There's a big jump between an A and a B, right? And if they don't know what those look like for you, if you haven't defined those standards for you, then they're going to do whatever their version of that is. Clarity is your friend, okay? The next thing is science and social studies fairs. Do you guys remember science and social studies fairs? For most of the people in this room, all we got was the due date. That was it. And it was up to you to figure out how you were going to make that 10 o'clock, right? That was it. That is not what's happened to the millennial and Gen Z generation. First of all, they get a tool list. And the tool list says, if you, you're going to need a trifold board. It needs to be this color. It needs to have, every paragraph needs to have this many sentences in it, right? Here's a YouTube video of how to make a potato clock. Here's the date we'll do the after school work day so your parents can come and finish the project, right? All of this. Every tool of how to be successful has been told before the job even gets started, okay? And then we do an even worse thing. Again, all the way up through graduate school, we give them a rubric. And we say, if you want to make an A, you'll do this, 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 and this. You'll do a B, C. So we tell them not only everything you need to be successful, but exactly how we will evaluate you and what things we're looking for. And then they come into your office, and you don't even have an accurate job description, right? Because you have that beautiful sentence that says, and other duties as assigned. That makes it difficult for anybody to be held responsible for anything ever, right? So this is a big problem that you have. You're used to people that are having really, really strong clarity of exactly what they want. They're used to having syllabi that can project into the future, exactly what projects are going to come up and how much impact they're going to have on their lives. They're used to having a distortion. So one of the things you can do is be really clear about job descriptions and how you're going to hold people accountable and emphasize that over and over again. The last thing we have is this. Now, some of you can literally hear this plastic slapping you across the face right now. You hear blink, 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 blink off your face. So, okay, let me go back in time here. There was a kid, his name was Jim Griffin, and I swear to y'all, he was 6 feet tall in 7th grade, all right? And everybody knew that Jim was the king of kickball, and everybody knew that Kristen was not, because it was the 90s, and my glasses were this big, all right? They looked like they were going to eat my face. So you know what I didn't do? I didn't play kickball. I went over and I made houses out of pine straw and I bossed people around because I was super good at that. I didn't have to do the thing I wasn't good at. I was able to figure out what I was good at, refine those skills, and continue to use those. That's not what has happened to your millennials. Instead, what's happened is, and Gen Zs, even worse for Gen Zs, what happens is the teacher looks at Krista's giant glasses, makes her the captain, right? They feel sorry for her. And now we're going to have a 2-week-long kickball unit. Everybody's going to play. We're not going to keep score, so nobody's going to high-five Jim Griffin. If he keeps the ball on the roof, the #1 indicator of awesomeness when it comes to school kickball, now what would happen would be a coach would come over and be like, you might want to tap that down. You don't want anybody to feel bad about themselves. Do you see how this messes with your concept of excellence? When there's not a clear standard, you don't even know what you do well. So, example, audience participation. All you have to do is say yes or no. You ready?
Yes.
Okay, great. Are you good at math?
Yes.
Are you good at science?
Yes.
Are you good at reading?
Yes.
Are you good at writing?
No.
Are you good at art?
No.
Are you good at music?
No.
Do you see how you can do that with no emotional trauma whatsoever? If we were in a room full of your airmen, your babies coming in right now, they'd be like, Yeah, kind of, right? Like, no. That's how we were able to have that whole series of American Idol, right? For all the Gen Zs, we're looking at it and be like, you never would have made it through 7th grade choir. That teacher would have destroyed you. We all had a teacher, right, that looked at you and was like, math is not your thing, baby. I'll just make you a really good writer. So this is the problem, is that there's a distortion of the fact, not only that you can do anything, but that you should be able to do everything. And this is why it's hard for them to stay in their own lane, right? So instead what we need to do is have those conversations of stay in your own lane. Now I'm not saying that you need to create a whole bunch more SMEs, that's not what we mean. But with the idea of do your area that you've been committed to, get as good as you possibly can be in that particular area, and then when you move to another area, get as great as you can be in that area, that's what you're looking for to do. You're constantly working to refine those diamonds, constantly looking to give them their best chance to be the shiniest diamond that they possibly can be, regardless of how dingy of a diamond they came in. All right? Woo! Do you feel like you learned anything today? Exhausted? Yes. Thank you very much. More from me, you absolutely can. You can go to genWHY.com. I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn. I do a lot of funny videos on my LinkedIn to just kind of lighten it up because some people take themselves way too seriously up in there. There's also links to podcasts in there, so if you want to nerd about this a little bit more, then you can. But otherwise, I've got a few minutes that I can answer questions if anybody has one. I can't necessarily tell you why your particular boss is a weirdo, but I can help you. Anybody have anything that's popping out that you're like, I gotta know? Okay, great. That's awesome. You're like 5 minutes early, rock and roll. So if you do realize you have a question later on, then by all means, shoot me an email. Just because I'm not going to be in the same room with you doesn't mean I'm not accessible to you. And the last thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you for what you do, sacrifices that you make. You do an awful lot of cool stuff that I'm learning more and more about for every Air Force. And if you ever run into anybody in the future that needs a speaker that's a little bit fun and doesn't make you want to die, please say my name. All right? Everybody have a great day. Thanks again.